The U.S. has yet to hit Canada with auto tariffs, but if it does, be warned. According to a new report, the result will be, quote, catastrophic. Right now, President Donald Trump is deciding whether to impose a tariff of up to 25% on cars and auto parts coming south from Canada. So what happens if Trump pulls that trigger? Joining me now is the chief economist for the Canadian Automobile Dealers Association, Michael Hatch. Hi, Mr. Hatch. Nice to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. So can you spell out for us what are the numbers that you've arrived at and how did you get there?
Yeah, we've released a report today indicating what we feel is the ultimate downside risk in terms of the threat facing the Canadian auto industry now from these threatened tariffs from the U.S. administration. If they are implemented and if Canada sees fit to retaliate in a tit-for-tat escalation manner, well in excess of 100,000 jobs could be at risk in Canada on the manufacturing side and on the retailing side. Of course, we represent the retailers, 3,200 of which are in Canada, 150,000+ people working directly for them. And particularly the big threat on the Canadian side is the threat of the retaliatory strike, I guess, by the Canadian government, which ultimately would be a massive tax hike on the Canadian consumer of between $5,000 and $9,000 or even $10,000. So that's the ultimate threat. That's the worst case scenario. We're hopeful that it can be avoided. We're optimistic, but this is the reality that we're facing.
So just so I'm clear, the up to $9,000 additional price added to or additional cost added to the price of a car, and the 100,000 jobs is if Canada retaliates against this promised up to 25% tariff from the U.S.
That's right. And of course, these are all hypotheticals right now. Right now, in this moment, the biggest threat, I would argue, is faced by the American consumer because they will bear the brunt of the first strike, I guess, the first tariff that would be implemented potentially or hypothetically by the U.S. administration. That would be a massive tax hike on the American consumer. And then if Canada sees fit again to retaliate, that would be effectively a massive tax hike on the Canadian consumer. Average transaction prices hit $40,000 last year for new vehicles, new cars and trucks. And it doesn't take very advanced math to arrive at a pretty big number in terms of what the impact of that would be on the consumer if a 25% additional tax was added to that transaction.
How worried are your members that this is actually going to happen, that the U.S. will actually slap that tariff?
They're worried. I mean, of course, and that's why we're here. That's why we've done this work and we've done this report. We're hearing from them more and more. They read the news like everybody else. We're dealing with what I think is fair to say a uniquely unpredictable set of circumstances, a uniquely unpredictable administration in the United States that has proven itself already willing to implement tariffs against traditional trading partners on grounds that are questionable at best, national security grounds. So they're worried. They're very alarmed. This is, a potentially catastrophic event for our industry. It's the biggest threat that we faced in more than a decade since the downturn of 2008, 2009, which itself was very challenging. But I would argue that the downside of this threat is even potentially bigger and more severe for our members and for the economy at large.
So if your message to the Canadian government is don't retaliate, obviously they have to do something, and I'm sure you'd be empathetic to that.
Yes, of course.
So what should they do?
That's a very difficult question, and we're not here to question the government's approach to this point. We're broadly supportive of what they've done. We are supportive of the Prime Minister and of the Foreign Minister in terms of dealing with what is an almost impossible situation, particularly if the U.S. government pulls the trigger and implements these tariffs. They're going to be in a very difficult position. But what we're calling for is for the government to be ready for that, to hope for the best and prepare for the worst, which is what we're doing, and prepare for the worst by getting ready a suite of policies that can be made ready quickly in terms of supporting the industries and the consumers that will be impacted by these tariffs. And that is an exemption on sales tax of new vehicles if there are any Canadian retaliatory measures put in place, and a robust vehicle scrappage program, which is an incentive to get older, dirtier vehicles off the road and replace them with new cars, which is a program that's been used in the past with success to support the industry when it's going through difficult times, as it may well be very soon.
Do you think that there is any way to ratchet things down, to de-escalate things at this point, or do you foresee this as sort of inevitable?
It's not inevitable. Certainly, we're not there yet. We're looking forward into the future and we're preparing. But we would urge the government to continue doing what it's doing, and that is delivering the message in Washington and in Congress and through all of the levers at their disposal, and harnessing the many voices that exist in America that agree with us. The many voices that exist within Congress, in the state houses across America, in the 35 out of 50 states for whom Canada is the #1 trading partner, to continue leveraging those contacts and those voices in America that, again, are delivering the same message. And our counterparts in America are delivering the same message, which is ultimately a pro-consumer message, that you got to do what's best for the consumer. And when the consumer is best off, the economy is best off, and these tariffs would be very much against that, and they'd be anti-consumer.
Are you worried, though, that even the tariffs that have already been introduced are labeled very quite clearly? Many people around the president say this is anti-consumer, this is having a negative impact, and he's not listening.
That's right. So, and part of what we're saying today is that we can't hope to control what happens in the States or with any foreign government. And the actions that have been taken thus far have been targeted. They're not going to have a hugely negative impact on the steel and aluminum side.
Although some,
there will be some impact.
I think the fuel industry would contend it's a big impact, but yeah.
But for our members, but that's right. But they would pale in comparison. There'd be a drop in the ocean compared to the catastrophic event that would take place if these tariffs were to be levied, in full and for any length of time, and then if the Canadian government were to retaliate in kind. So again, selfishly, I'm glad that it's not me in that position. It's a very, very difficult, if not impossible, position for the government. And maybe there's things that could have been done differently before this point, but who's to say that that is the case? They're in a very difficult position. But we would urge them to continue doing what they're doing, continue going hard at the negotiating table in the hopes of avoiding the worst and preparing for it if it does come.
I've only got a minute, but you just mentioned there may have been things that they could have done differently. Do you think there are some specifics there?
It's so difficult to say. Again, this is a uniquely challenging set of circumstances, a uniquely unpredictable administration that we're dealing with in America, again, that has proven itself willing to levy tariffs on its traditional allies on, questionable grounds. So, they've done all of the right things in terms of leveraging the contacts that we have as a country and of amplifying the many voices that exist in America that are pro-trade, that are pro-consumer. And again, our counterparts representing dealers in America are doing the same thing. And we hope and are confident that at the end of the day that reason will win out. But again, as you hope for the best, as in life, you have to prepare for the worst.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mr. Hatch. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Some troubling new numbers have surfaced in Quebec relating to extremism. The data comes from the